Hey everyone, if you're new here, I'm Marley. I'm in M1, M2, first, second year med school limbo and loving it. It's great. If you're a med student or you're applying this cycle, then you're probably familiar with secondary applications. You know, that seemingly endless onslaught of school-specific essays that comes after you take the plunge and submit your primary application through AMCAS, aka the one with your personal statement and experiences and MCAT scores and grades and all that other general information about you. Basically, after your primary application is verified and your letters of recommendation are submitted, usually each of the med schools that you apply to will send you back their secondary application to fill out, which this is done on their own timeline. Like some schools do this earlier or later than others, earlier as in June, and later as in August. And this is also assuming that your primary application is submitted and verified in good time. And I say usually here because there are some schools that have MCAT or GPA score cutoffs. Like for example, okay, there's a school that has a 505 MCAT cutoff minimum. And so if you have less than a 505, it's probably best just not to waste your time and money on applying there. There's really not a good way around that, especially since not only do they charge a ton and ream you upfront for the primary applications, but also each school has its own fee for secondary application submission. And that ranges anywhere between $50 and $150. And it just goes up every year. It's insane. But this is where things get tricky. The average number of med schools that somebody applies to these days is between 20 and 25 schools. That's a lot of schools. That's a ton. And think about it. Each secondary app asks for between 2 and 6 essays, and sometimes more than that. Some schools have even more than 6. So multiply that out and you've got anywhere between 40 and over 100 essays to write for all of those secondaries, assuming you get all those secondaries back to fill out. This is a setup for burnout before you even start med school. It's insane. I don't even hate writing, and that is just too much for me, which is why I only send secondaries to 9 schools. What's nice is that many schools reuse their secondary application prompts year after year, so you can easily just Google Reddit, SDN, Student Doctor Network. You should easily be able to find previous year's prompts. And then it might be helpful to pre-write some of those essays so you can spread out the workload and not have to write 100 essays in 3 weeks, Although there's always the risk that prompts will be changed. And so if you pre-wrote a bunch and then they changed all of the prompts, then you're left with these essays that you wasted time on that you can't even use. But it could be worth it for schools that consistently do reuse their prompts. And a lot of people out there will say just pre-write a bunch of generic-ish essays that, respond to common questions asked on secondary apps, and then just change the name and a couple of little details and submit them. No, that's a terrible idea. That is a horrible idea. Do not do this because you think that an admissions committee member who goes through hundreds, if not thousands of applications isn't going to be able to see right through that and pick out, this person spent literally 0 time on this essay. You can tell that this is just copy pasted. You think they can't tell? Of course they can. And in this super competitive process, all it takes is one red flag to show that you are not a totally dedicated applicant and for them to have an excuse to toss you in their reject pile. So don't give them that easy out. Obviously, it's okay to repurpose bits and pieces in certain stories in different schools' secondary applications, but just be sure to really tailor it to the school's specific mission, values, highlights of their program. Give each essay on your secondaries its due diligence. Let the admissions committee people reading your stuff know that you really did your research. That's impressive. I talked more about this in my What I Wish I Had Asked Before Applying to Med School video, which I'll link above. Now, something I wish was talked about more is the fact that it is okay to just not submit secondaries to a school. You're not obligated to send in a secondary just because you sent in a primary. I sent primaries to 11 schools and I sent secondaries to 9. Why? Because when I got the secondaries from a couple of schools, I realized that their prompts were different because yes, I had Googled them before and seen what their previous year's prompts had been and Anyway, I realized that their prompts had changed in such a way that it reflected a shift in the kind of student that the schools wanted to recruit, if that makes sense. For example, there was one school that asked me to list my research publications. And it was a big answer box. And it wasn't phrased like a question, like, do you have any publications? It's like they assume that I must have not just one, but several, like a lot. And then the next question asked after that was how my research experiences were formative in my decision to become a physician. And I was sitting there, I was like, wait, but they weren't. I mean, they were a plus and great in lots of ways, but I wouldn't by any stretch of imagination call them formative in my decision to become a physician. And the fact that they like wrote the question the way it was, and like clearly they were looking for, you know, people with these much more robust researchy backgrounds, didn't ask anything about like community involvement, service, stuff that other things that I place a lot of value on. They didn't ask about any of that. And I certainly didn't have like a list of publications to just whip out. I had like 1.5 maybe at the time. So right there, I'm reading these questions and I'm just thinking, you know what? They're clearly shifting their priorities and what kind of student they want to recruit. And I'm not going to bend over backwards just to try to fit this mold. That's really not me. So I didn't submit the secondary. Boom, $100 and a few hours of writing saved. Bottom line, don't try to be basically somebody else just for the sake of medical school applications. Quality always, always, always beats quantity in med school apps. I've said it before and I'll say it again forever and ever. Do your research on schools. Like deep dive. Showcase that due diligence in your secondaries and the adcoms will love you for it. Plus, you'll be more prepared for interviews when they inevitably invite you over because you have these amazingly researched, wonderful secondaries. And at those interviews, it's really common to get asked, what do you specifically like about the school? So you do your due diligence, you write out awesome secondaries, and you're going to be more prepared for those interviews anyway. Winning all around. So I hope this information was helpful to those of you who are applying currently or applying soon. Let me know that it was by hitting the like button down below. Subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. Love you all. Hope you have a fabulous day and catch you next week.